Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to Lutheran Child and Family Services of Illinois Annual Community Meeting. I know many of the people in the room, but for those that I don't, my name is Mike Bertrand, and I'm blessed to be the President and CEO here at LCFS. I'll hit the next slide. So first and foremost, happy birthday to us. In 2023, LCFS celebrates our 150th year of providing services to children and families in Illinois. You'll always hear me, and I think most of my colleagues at LCFS, if we say children, we say families, because we know that's where children thrive. Even though, like many, we trace our roots back to an orphanage model. So we have a strong vision that we're going to talk about today, and we're going to talk about people joining us in. It's not just pertinent to Illinois, but pertinent across the country if you're dealing with children and families that are struggling. So welcome. There's our map. Map to more technical difficulty. But there are many of us in the room, but there are also folks that are zooming in from around the country. And welcome to them. Oh, there we have it. A vast amount of our participants are here in Illinois, but as you can see from the map, we've got folks zooming in on this topic from around the country. And as I said, we're going to be focusing on Illinois and change we'd like to be a strong part of the dialogue for, but these are dialogues that, if not happening across the country, certainly should be across the country. So this is a hybrid event. We'll be utilizing both the chat and Q&A. Q&A if you're in the room, Q&A functions online. So for those that are online, these are, I guess, the instructions I'm supposed to give to you. You can use the chat to share your thoughts and respond to what you're hearing during the presentations. With all the other online attendees, if you have questions for any of today's presenters, we'll be having a Q&A session at the end of the event. Those in the room will be able to raise their hands, and we'll come around with a mic. And guests online are encouraged to submit questions with the Q&A function, not the chat. Chat is just chatting with each other while it's going on at any time. And that way our staff that are monitoring that function will know that that's a question that you want to have put out to some of the speakers today. So today we'll be hearing from a keynote presentation by one of LCFS board members. I'll be talking about her a little bit more later, but Tamela Milan-Alexander, who has both lived experience and plus 20 plus years working in the community health arena. And what you're going to hear us talking a lot about today is how do we get much more of a community focus for struggling families in our state. So to get us started, I'd like to set the stage for today's topic. Stronger Tomorrow, Championing Systems Change to Support Children and Families, and why LCFS is pushing for ways to support families in their communities. So I get the job of the boring stuff and the data. So this is foster care, child welfare, children in foster care in the United States. This comes from, as you can see from the bottom, the Annie Casey Foundation comes from their kids count that's done every year. And this was about as far back as the data. It went through 2021. But as you can see nationally, things had gone up, kind of leveled, and has been in a decline. So foster care in the US overall has been declining. The next one. But this is Illinois. As you can see, we have not been declining. We've been taking more children into care, and that curve has been going upwards. And this is stopped at 2020, which was somewhere around the 20K. Any of my DCFS folks in here? I was on a call the other day that said there's about 24,000 right now in 2023. Or I think that was projected in the governor's budget from DCFS. So that trajectory has continued while the national trajectory continues to go down. So as we see this, we're like, okay, well, wait a second. Why is this, and why is this happening to our children? And you're going to hear me say our children all the time. And when I talk about our child welfare system, you're not going to hear me say DCFS, LCFS. I'm going to talk about our system because we're a part of it. as our DCFS, and I know we have some folks representing some other organizations here, as well as people that are committed to our mission. Do you want to hit the next one? Is it working? So this is slightly different. So this is, the other data just showed how many children are in foster care. And the first slide was national, then I showed you Illinois. So nationally, so you're saying, okay, great, we're not bringing children into foster care, but does that mean children are not getting hurt? That there isn't some sort of mistreatment going on? But as you can see here, so these are again the national numbers of confirmed by Child Protective Services of maltreatment rate per 1,000. So same thing as coming into care nationally. You see that nationally, those numbers of children that are at least identified of having been abused, neglected, or have experienced some form of maltreatment is also on the decline in our country. If we go to the next slide, please. Here's Illinois again. What we've experienced in our state is not just more children coming into care, but the founded incidents of maltreatment also are bucking national trends the wrong way. They're going up, and you know, we want to look at different ways of changing that. You want to hit the next slide? So this is children birth to 17 in foster care rate per 1,000, juxtaposing Illinois to the United States. So again, just putting those two together to show how the national trend is going down pretty significantly, but in Illinois, we continue to trend upwards. Right? Told you this was the boring part with all the data. So let's do a little bit of comparison and looking at what some other states have been able to do and achieve. So purposely knowing that New York State had done some amazing things, said let's compare Illinois to New York, and we'll talk a little bit about what New York was able to do, and then what we really want to see happen in our state and how we move things. So Illinois, we have about, this is, I believe, through the 2020 census, if I remember correctly. Yes, almost just a little under 13 million citizens. And New York has just over 20 million. So as you can see, they're about 30%, don't make me do math, or higher, more like 40% higher population than the state of Illinois. So this is Illinois versus New York. So as you can see, over the span of 9 years, and I'm sorry, I'm trying to not do and still have people hear me, New York, with their higher population, had about 25,000 kids in care, but we had about 17 and a half in 2011. And then you can see the trends as New York State, with 8 million more people than us, has driven theirs down, and as we've gone up, they've followed the national trend heading down. And as you can see, in 2020, we had about 5,000 more kids in foster care than the state of New York, even though they have about 40% more population than we do. So what did New York do? Or do I have another slide? Nope, I do have another slide. This is also the issues of maltreatment, the slide I showed you before, the national and versus Illinois, where New York still has higher, but again, their trend line is trending down, where our trend line, as I shared earlier, continues to go up. So they have 8 million more kids, so they're still experiencing more children actually in maltreatment or experiencing some issue of abuse or neglect. I don't like to say maltreatment. We know if you work within our systems, you know, the vast majority of children that come into contact are for some form of neglect versus some serious abuse. But as you can see here, and again, in New York State, they're trending down. We continue to trend up. What's our? In New York City, no surprise, is really the driver behind what's happening in New York State, being the largest city in the country and the major population center for the state of New York. But they have a total number of kids in their foster care dipped to an all-time low of only 8 million children. I probably should have pulled the population of New York City. And what do they attribute that to? They had 50,000 kids. Oh, no, go back, sorry. I forgot about that because they had 50,000 kids in the 1990s in foster care. By the way, so did we. Illinois had about 55,000. For those of us that were around then, we were right up there with New York, even though with the population different. But as you can see, 2010 they were down to 17,000, and that was 10 years. So that was 13 years ago now. But by the data points, 10 years a difference from the data. But they were able to drive from 55,000 down to 17. As did Illinois. We got our numbers down also. Okay. So, what do they attribute it to? Investment in services like mental health and substance abuse counseling for parents under investigation. So this is at the time of investigation, and to keep them in their home. And offering these in New York City, they're offering these services, so in what we call in our system, intact services to 24,000 families. In 2020, which is the last data I was over to pull up on DCFS, we serve about little over 4,000, and that's consistent. As I looked at other data points, we serve about 4,000 families together when issues are identified versus 24,000. So you're probably figuring out where this dialogue is going for us. Go ahead. So in 2018, the federal government, and signed by our then president, which I won't comment on, came up with what's called the Family First Act. So under Title 4E, correct me if I'm wrong, Beverly, you know this better than me, foster care is a federal entitlement. So they will reimburse the states for children that come into care. What the Family First Act said was, if you think it's a child that would be eligible for foster care, but you can serve them in different ways, you can still draw down the federal money for that. So what this has created is the ability to do things very differently, and the ability to say, how do we, at minimum, I'm going to talk a little bit about child protection versus child welfare versus a child well-being system. And this is just Mike pontificating a little bit. So on that, and what we're trying to help be a voice in our state to move towards. But that gives us the opportunity, without any loss of federal funding, to embrace how do we keep families together? How do we do things differently? And how do we ensure that children are safe? Because we want children to be safe, but it's our belief that they do best and are safest when they're in their biological family. And if you've attended the past few meetings that we've done, we do these every year, we've really focused a lot of attention on the disproportionality of families of color in our system. So we see this as not the next step, but to say, why are we breaking up disproportionately families of color when we could be doing something vastly different that, if you look at the national trends and you look at the state of New York, keeps kids safe and doesn't invoke the trauma that is foster care. Because even when it's needed, it's a traumatic event for a child. It's a traumatic event for a family. My first 7 years as a professional out of college was as an investigator for DCFS. Then I went back, and my friend Tracy and I worked together in casework. But it's traumatic. Let me just share that from personal experience of viewing having to take a child away. It's very traumatic to that child, even when it's warranted and even when it's necessary. So let's go ahead and go to the next. So here's where we get into kind of where we're at. I would argue in Illinois we very much have a child protection system. We wait until something happens, and then somebody calls 1-800-25-ABUSE, and rightfully so, the child protection system comes out, sends an investigator out. That's what I did the first part of my career, and says, what's going on here? Is there something going on? Is there something that we need to do? And then we respond. And then we, as I said, about 4,000 families will say, we don't think the risk factor is that high. Let's work with you and your family. And in severe cases, protective custody is taken, child's put into foster care, and that system engages. To a child welfare system. So I would argue what New York has now is more of a child welfare system. In other words, it's still something happens, as you saw, if something gets reported to the officials in New York, they come out and they say, okay, oh yeah, there's some risk factors here to children. We need to do something with this. But they say, let's give you some help at a much greater rate than we do. So from a child welfare system is a much richer mix of how do we support families, how do we take those struggles, and how do we keep them whole. What we want to see happen is a child well-being system. And in the child well-being system is there's no call. A family gets what they need way before things get bad and somebody has to call the formal system. That our communities are structured in a way, and our funding mechanisms in our state are structured in a way that if you need help within your community, and that may be, and that may look at a very different model, because families don't trust our system. So if LCFS decided we're going to open a new office in this community, I'm not sure people would come because who are we? And if they know, oh, well, you're part of that system over here that's been protecting children, that's not a bad thing. We're all doing great work. But say, ooh, I'm struggling. I know I got to get a hold of my substance abuse problem, and I'm not taking good care of my children, or I'm struggling with mental health issues. I know I can go over here. I know I can go to this church, and a lot of communities, churches are those places where people see it as a safe place where I can go talk and at least get some help. Or this community, or sometimes it's, Ms. Johnson down the street is like the neighborhood, making sure people get what they need. So we want to see a move, and we're going to talk about it a little bit. And today is really the start of that dialogue for us. And we're going to talk a little bit about what we're doing, but really we want to have a dialogue as to how do we move from child protection, which is what I think we are today, as a state. We're dipping our toe into child welfare. Okay, we're not just stepping in and removing every child, where some were saying we can provide services and intact family, but again, we can do that at a much greater rate to a time, a place, sometime that what's happening is abuse and neglect doesn't happen. It happens rarely. We're not saying we're going to get a well-being. There needs to be child protection. There'll probably always need to be child protection. We know some of the issues some of our parents are facing. That's not going to go away. We're going to have a protective response within our state. And then we're going to also want to have a child welfare response within our state to say, okay, something did happen, but let's work with you. Let's believe in you. Let's get a handle on this. Let's always keep children safe, and let's provide more child welfare, quote unquote, services. Again, to the day where we're structuring our communities in a way that is a child well-being system. And the example I always use that everybody seems to understand, if you don't work in our world, is I always use the example of healthcare. So Our healthcare system 30 years ago in our country was, you have a heart attack, you get treatment. You get sick, you get what you need. Then we move to, let's try to prevent that heart attack. Wouldn't it be better instead of waiting until somebody has a heart attack? So that's like child welfare. We started to say, let's now start looking at people's habits. How can we prevent somebody ever having a heart attack? To where I think we're heading now with our healthcare, where they're looking at the social determinants of health, where they're saying, if there's not a source of nutritious food in the community, you have a higher chance of having a heart attack. So let's get a health well-being system in our community, and let's look at those social determinants and say, what is and we all know you can exercise left and right, you can eat great, and you still might have a heart attack. So again, it's not like we cannot have all these systems, but again, how can we do better? How can we, knowing every last study has shown children do better outside of foster care, except in extreme cases. They do better if they're in a strong family. One of the things I always say about Illinois that I think we've done a great job with is kinship care. About half the children in foster care are with a relative. A lot of states, because there's it's roughly a couple months if those relatives haven't gotten, so if you're a grandparent, haven't gotten through the licensing process, the federal money stops. So some states have said, well, nope, then move the children, blah, 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 blah. One thing we have done really well, and I think we can all be proud of in Illinois, is half of our children are with kin relationships. And if they don't go through we're always encouraging that licensing process, but if they don't, that's okay. And we don't remove the child, and we say they're best here with grandma, or auntie, or uncle, or fictive kin, or mom's best friend for 30 years, who says that's my person. And obviously in those situations, background checks, all the proper things are done, and so on and so forth. Want to hit the next slide? LCFS had just formulated our new strategic plan. We're now drilling that into an annual plan, what we're going to do. And what we did was really said, what do we want our state to look like 10 years from now? If anybody does strategic planning in here, I know that's a no-no, because you're supposed to, like even 3 years now, they're saying the world moves too fast, you can't. But that was okay with us because we're looking at the big picture in the long term here. So we said, let's go 10 years out. Now, then we boiled that down to 3, and we're boiling it down to what we're going to do every year to make that happen. But I wanted to highlight, we have 4 goals, but I wanted to highlight for today's conversation, these 2. To become a catalyst for innovation and enhance community commitment in the delivery of comprehensive services for families and youth. So LCFS, I always like to use our Springfield office because I grew up in Springfield, so I just use it as an example. We have a long time, about 50-year presence in the Springfield community. We are largely a state contractor of foster care services. We're not embedded in that community. We're not at the community table saying what do people need. So we knew the first thing we have to do is get more involved in our communities and get more active and say, okay, we're not just a quote unquote child welfare agency. We are a human service agency. We are and we are a neighbor. That's what I like to say all the time for where our offices are. We have a professional role there, but we're a neighbor. And I'm assuming, like most of us in here, you want, first of all, you want to know your neighbors. I know we've gotten away from that concept somewhat in these times, probably exacerbated even more by COVID. But you want to know your neighbors, and when you know your neighbor and they need some help, or they need a hand up, or they just need some assistance, that's what you do. I can remember, why am I drawing a blank on her name? The older lady who lived in my neighborhood growing up, and as soon as my driveway was shoveled, my parents were pointing me over there, and to about the 3rd time, they didn't have to point anymore. Because Mrs. Infield, now I remember her name, because you're going to go over and you're going to shovel Mrs. Infield's driveway and her walkway. So we know as an agency in our communities, we need to be a neighbor, And and in the instance of that, we are professionals, we are a professional organization. So we also need to be saying, what does the community need? And our focus is on nurturing children and youth into successful adulthood and partnering to do that. So, and we want to be a part of dialogue if it's involving seniors, because we're a good neighbor. But in those instances, if there's an unmet need for seniors, it's really our place to say, who can do this? How do we support that? Frequently, in times of scarce resources, which in the not-for-profit sector, particularly for community-focused services, it can be highly competitive. And the organizations in the community compete. A grant becomes available, and everybody wants to get that money. We want to say, wait a second, you're better than us to do this. How do we support you getting that money? Because that's what's needed in the community. And then goal number 2, for us, this is a pretty bold shift, because as you can see, we want to be a driving force in our state to make services available to families and youth at any time they are needing, with a focus on preventing the need for deep-end services such as residential and foster care for children. So LCFS, 85 to 90% of our budget is in foster care for children. And we're saying we need to change that. We need to flip that switch. And not just for us, we can do it in our own little world, just as we've done with our work on disparate outcomes, is to talk about our partners. We're part of a system. We partner with the state, we partner with other agencies, and we want to say to everybody, let's do better. Let's say, how can families in a community not need an authoritative intervention? Because that's what we are right now. We are an authoritative intervention. And that's okay. That authoritative intervention, as I said, needs to be present. Children, things do happen. So that child protection system needs to be there. That child welfare system needs to be there. But largely on this side of the room, before this meeting, we had a Board of Trustee meeting. And our Board of Trustees was involved with putting this plan together. Basically, we said we need to kind of put everything at risk and shift who we are, because it's right for families, it's right for children. Because again, we want to see children and youth successfully nurtured into adulthood. I'm getting a signal to wrap it up. So is there a next slide, or did I go into the introduction of Tamela? Okay, so now this is where, because I know a lot about Tamela's background, but if I go off the script, I'll get in trouble. So our today's keynote speaker is Tamela Milan-Alexander, to discuss her insights and recommendations for how our systems can better serve children and families. As I shared, Tamela is on the LCFS Board of Trustees, so she is one of my bosses. So please be nice to her. Tamela's worked for 20 plus years as a parent advocate, peer educator, developmental screener, community health worker, and case manager. Currently, she serves as the Director of Community Engagement at EverThrive, Illinois. She is also the founder of Bridges to Bond, a Chicago area organization that offers strategies to bridge providers in service and policy in engaging with the community for collaborative health equity solutions. There's that one thing COVID showed us is, as we all know, there's a lot of inequity in our society, and that exists also within health. And I think that health and protective factors for families intermix significantly, particularly access to resources. Anyway, in addition, Tamela has served on numerous boards of directors, including LCFS, yay, Health Connect One, the American Academy of Pediatrics Family and Partnerships Network, and the National Healthy Start Association. Tamela has also become a national speaker, sharing her inspiring journey of having been on both sides of the fence, quote unquote. So we're very honored to have her today. So Tamela, thank you so much for being here. And welcome to
I'm so nervous Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for having me. I'm not going to get too close to this because I can be pretty animated, as they like to say. But thank you so much for taking some time to spend with us here. I always try to start off by telling people where I've been so they can understand where I am today. And so I'm going to take you on a little journey with me into my past so you can see why I stand here so remarkably today. Next slide, please. Okay, all right. So the objective today is for me to just share my personal story. It's my story and I own it. But how systems can decrease harm. Mike talked a lot about changing the narrative. And that's what I heard when he was speaking. And how do we do that? And how did changing that narrative impact me when I first came into the system? And how respectful support and encouragement make a difference instead of disrespectful care. And then just the importance of building trust and working collaboratively with families in the community. So as I go back to the 6P days, who love the Bulls? Who remember Jordan? 6P, yeah. But just a little place beyond there was what I used to call home, which was the Henry Horner homes, or as we affectionately called it, the projects. So the Hornets was where I was. I lived there with, at that time, 4 children. I was in a domestic violence relationship with my husband at that time, because at that time, that was what was considered affordable housing. It's the best place you can get when you are low income, lack many resources or empowerment opportunities. Big words in a really big setting, but there were no places to really go to school and learn about how to, do things better. We were just happy to be able to get out the building safely. And it was easier to buy a $5 bag of heroin than it was to get a loaf of bread or lettuce or tomato for a sandwich. And so I joined the life of a drug addict. It was my new norm when I left mom and dad's house. Next slide, please. While on this journey, while using heroin and cocaine, this became my regular. As soon as my foot hit the floor in the morning, it was off to the races. Now, did I wake up one day and say, this is the day I'm going to become a drug-induced heroin addict? Nobody does that. But just as Mike was saying, you go over there after a certain amount of time, you don't have to ask, to go over there and do her driveway. It's something about being infected by what's going on in your community that can make such a difference on what happens to you. Because one of the things I would hear all the time, especially now I was having children, and you know how those nurses and those doctors would look at me, because I was I'm not going to prenatal care. I'm not doing none of that. I'm in and out. Woo, woo. I had my baby. They're not going to catch up with me. I'm going back to the projects because they're not coming to follow up. They're not coming to follow up. But most people say, if you use drugs, you don't love your kids. It was not that for me. I did not love myself. I was struggling with an addiction that had taken hold of me, and everything I saw around me was in that same trench with me. I can remember so vividly the day that would transform my journey forever. You see, one of those days living in the Hornets, I was on my way like any other day. I told you, as soon as my foot hit the floor, I gotta go get it because the sickness is what drove it. I didn't want to be dope sick, as they referred to it. I didn't want my stomach twisting and turning and my mind not being quieted. I needed to go out. I needed to go get my fix, my blow. And during this time, as I came out the building, the projects were a violent place. And there were no one pouring dollars into community investments. There was high poverty, high crime. But on this particular day, I was on my way to the next building, and then a gunfire. And all I could hear is pow, 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 pow. And as I need to get my fix. So I'm just gravitating to the ground. I move quickly to protect myself from the gunfire. It's coming from behind me. It's coming from in front of me. I see a tire. I'm thinking to myself, bullets bounce off rubber, right? I pray that's the case. But that was my logic. And as I ran to keep myself from being shot, I fell behind this tire. And all of a sudden, the car took off. And my coat caught underneath the car and took me with it. So I was dragged several blocks. And as the car turned the corner under the Lake Street L, I can remember the tire rubbing against my face, my cheeks. But let me tell you how God's mercy and grace is. Because the neighborhood wino, she always stood at that store because the only place to go get regular food at was you can buy liquor, gym shoes, and cigarettes in the same place. But she stopped the car because she seen my foot by the back tire. And when that car stopped, I knew I was broken, beaten, battered, and by the way, pregnant too, with baby number 5. Next slide, please. Oh, there we go. But that's my family at the time. I look in her eyes and I see how lost this young woman was. I thought I had left my parents' house and went to live on my own in the projects. I was gonna make it happen no matter what community I was in. I was gonna make it work. I was with the father of my children. I wasn't out there bad like that. But I had blew my nasal system out. I've been dragged underneath a car. I had no hope. Even when other people kept praying for me, I kept saying, what is y'all talking about? No one cares for me. No one cares for my situation. You may care for my children, but you don't care for me. Next slide, please. At some point, I figured out that maybe I should get on methadone. I was tired of being sick and tired of being sick and tired. But I got on the methadone program, and at some point after I've been dragged and I was trying to get myself together, it was quite natural that all 5 of those children were removed from my custody. And it wasn't just traumatic for my kids, it was traumatic for all involved. Now, I was blessed to have my parents get my kids. And my parents took in 5 kids with my siblings in the house. We still joke about it today. And it's not funny. This is my joke. All right. But what happened is, I'm a smart girl, as you can see. I got pregnant with baby number 6. And people say, are you nuts? You got 5 children that have been taken out your custody. These people got you taking drops every day. But it wasn't a lot of other supportive services. Listen clearly to me. I was taking drops. I would go to my methadone program and get, I did so well because I didn't drop dirty. They just let me bring them all home with me. I just carried them all like this. They was my babies. I didn't even have to go in there like that. Not come and talk to us about the trauma you've been through. Not having time to assess what I want to do next in my life. I got none of that during that time. But while pregnant with baby number 6, you know what they were ready to do. How many of you want to guess? They were ready to remove this baby from my care. Now, I remember clearly, and I don't remember a lot of my pregnancies, unfortunately, but this one was special. Because I can remember her little feet going across my stomach, and I could remember just thinking, wow. You know, they broke my apartment down. I went from a 3-bedroom to a 2. I was working at Church's Chicken, and I was buying little clothes, little outfits, and I was just ready. And I remember going into labor. And I went to University of Illinois at Chicago. My mom had worked there. So I wanted to have a support person in the place. And even though I had been not using illicit drugs, I hadn't been on heroin and cocaine, I was just taking the methadone, I was still faced with the very plausibility that my baby would be removed from my care. And when I tell you today, I would not be here because it would have broken me in ways in which you would never be able to understand, because I wanted to change. I wanted to do better. And please don't do me like this. But what would happen that day, because I had not been dropping dirty, and because I was going to the program, instead of DCFS coming to remove my child, a representative from LCFS walked through that door and would change the trajectory of my life forever. It is not easy to look at somebody and say, I put your trust in you. If you say you can help me, then help me. But please don't hurt me. And so I was given a chance, and they said, if you sign A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, where do I sign? I was ready to sign I could have gave up an arm for her, because that's what mattered to me at that time. Next slide. Because, you know, whenever I show up like this, right? This is the file. It should say patient 0. I don't know how I got it. I'm learning. I have 5 children with the DCFS, under DCFS custody, 6 pregnancies, 4 with mother with opioid use disorder, 2 with neonatal abstinence syndrome, which is withdrawal for people who don't know. I was a public housing resident with domestic violence. I've been dragged under a car, so I got PTSD. I was unresponsive to them to obtaining children back, non-compliant to moving out of public housing, unemployed, yet highly motivated to change. Do you see how one narrative and another narrative, and they weren't clicking together? They weren't clicking together. Because all I wanted was, if you looked at my history, talk to me before you make the assumption. And those are my kids all grown up. You see them? They're terrible now. All right, next slide, please. See, to me, I hear this word in my work today, and so I'll follow up with this. Through my time through LCFS and working with their case manager, not only was I able to keep my baby in my care so that we can be together while we do this work. While I worked on me, I still had my baby with me, my muse, my sense of inspiration, the light of my life. While also working to get the other kids back, because she fueled that too. I could have been like, oh, my baby cool, she with my parents. But it meant something to me to get them back. It meant something to my kids when they saw me. I could have brought them a blow-up balloon. They didn't care long as they saw me. And I don't even think I had recognized it for so long. And so working with LCFS, they had me thinking about, what do I want to do with my life? Do I want to go to school? Do I want to have a career? What are the things that I want to achieve? I'm the author of my story. Why am I not taking pen to paper and thinking about what I want to do? And so one of the things they did is say, well, you can go to college. I was like, yeah, right. Not possible. You see my surroundings. I'm looking at the window. I see downtown, but between downtown and here is glasses in the play field, broken bottles, drug paraphernalia. Nobody going to school. That's crazy talk. Then they said, well, we'll help you fill out the FAFSA. You better, because you know you need a doctoral degree to do that anyway, right? But that's the difference between when somebody's selling you justice and equity. I like this because one of the things that came out of me working under and with and alongside my case manager was my want to give back, right? Because now I got all my kids back, all my kids. I done moved out the projects. I'm in a townhome. I got my Section 8 housing. My first real job, ching, ching. I'm working with school. I did all this stuff. But every time I go back and talk to my friends, we still not all looking over the fence. I got a boost because these were like angels to me, the case workers that work with me, because not only did they take in what I wanted to do, they listened. Even if it was a call at 7 p.m. Like, y'all gave me all these kids back. You know I don't know what I'm doing. That's why I say that. This is my joke for the day. Y'all can laugh. Next slide, please. But honestly, they won't get out. But now I've had all these years to work with the programs that worked with me. My pediatrician that put me in contact with the Healthy Start program, and being able to work with Healthy Start to make sure that I was getting those, people start connecting the dots for me. And I'm so grateful, because a program that keeps families together should always be the end goal. Instead of giving people handouts, you give people hand up. And now I spent 17 years working with moms and babies because they were like me. They just needed some help. They needed a hand. They needed somebody to give them and help them navigate systems that's not always a clear view. You don't always know what the end goal is for different organizations. Are they showing up in your life? So now I work for EverThrive Illinois. I am the new community engagement director for them. Come on now, hallelujah. Give a shout out to EverThrive Illinois. So right now, but our mission today is to achieve reproductive justice in the healthcare ecosystem, and it is an ecosystem, right? As you spoke about, all of these things are intersected. All things intersect for the good. And so we do this through our community-driven partnerships, policy actions, and systems change, and our vision, just and affirming healthcare ecosystem where individuals, families, and communities can thrive. I heard you say a lot about child health being. I want us to move to family. Put the word family where child is. Let's start making those connections. That's what we should be doing. And then our values, once again, reproductive justice, anti-racism, centering the most impacted, bold action and transformation. I found my home at EverThrive. Next slide, please. One of the things that I like to share about the work that I do today, because It was an LCFS case manager who said you need to make sure you put your baby into care. Make sure you're going to those doctor's visits. Know what the risks are, because you're on methadone, you done had this baby. What are the risks to that? You know, nobody had ever said that, and that was my 6th child. So when I had an opportunity to think about, you know, and I say this, my mom used to always tell me, you're gonna have a setback. You had all them kids run outside, you're gonna have a setback. I was like, what are you talking about? Like, really? I didn't understand what it was then, but I understand it now, because when I hear it in the community, there's a disconnect between what language we hear and what healthcare is saying, what other different systems of care and social supports are saying to families. So it put the P in passion for me, right? And so I just was so happy that one of my very first things to do over there 1 year ago, yeah, it's been over a year and 1 month, but I was able to work on this, which is called The Gathering, which is built for people that were just like me, who needed some information. Even if my friend had the information, I was better off than have no information at all about the risk and how you support folks who don't have it all and don't have access to the type of resources that we know are lacking in many communities. Next slide, please. And there's just some information on joining The Gathering. Many of your communities need access to this information so that we can start ending when we talk about disparities. When we think about the gap, the biggest gap in some of our work is we're not adding communities' voice to this work. This is plain language. You can take this anywhere and give it to somebody else. No, okay, I'm bleeding too much. My head been hurting for over 3 days. That's not normal. Don't just go take a Tylenol and go lay down like grandma used to tell you to do. We gotta start putting the right information in the hands of folks who need it, because every time we walk into a place, we gotta fight. The system's not set up for us to succeed, not in communities of color in particular. Always got to have your dukes up, as my dad would say. So we have to be more informed. And the way we do that is by working with community. I still do it. I have outreach workers, I pull them right off the west side. Hey girl, what you doing this week? I need you to help me with this campaign. We want to make sure that Black mothers are not down on the west and south sides without having some good information in their hand. I also continue to work with families. I love these MCH, maternal and child health family councils that Ever Thrives has. Even before I got there, I was doing this work with them, because I always bring my family, you know, get all the girls together and say, hey, they want to give you this information and they're going to give you a $30 stipend. Gonna be able to go get the kids some diapers, whatever you need. But you get to be your authentic self. Nobody's gonna tell you what to say. You go in, you answer questions based on your lived experience. And no one gets to tell you what to say in those settings. So one of the things that I continue to do today is make sure that there's an opportunity for the families. And you know, I was on the west side of Chicago for a little while with the Health Style program. Now I'm talking about folks all over the state, which is so new to me, but I love it already, because there's so many voices that are so unheard and don't know how to leverage their voice, don't know the power of their voice. Next slide, please. Once again, I'd like to say disrespectful care in any setting. I was so happy when that LCFS case manager walked in that room and my stomach was stirring, because I thought my baby was gonna be removed from my care. The sickening drop. Everybody, you ever been on the elevator, it drop? That's how I felt that whole time. Not even understand the trauma I'm sending to my child. But I felt like that the entire day. Just my stomach dropping. And somebody said, you had tried enough. You had did enough to earn the right to take your baby home. I had to earn that. So survival is not the right response to that, right? And I say over the years, I've always talked to people about, you know, people tell you, why don't you pull your bootstraps up? If you ain't got no job, why you don't have a job? If you ain't been to school, why you ain't been to school? Pull your bootstraps up. And I always would say, please give me some shoestring. If you give me some shoestring, boy, I can run. Oh, you don't even know I'm Jesse Owens. And it's exactly what I did when I got it. Next slide, please. Just some of the work that I've learned in my years working with LCFS, you know, I continue to want to be a part. I mean, I'm addicted to LCFS, as you can see. Now I'm on the board. I was a client. Now I want to be on the board. I'm not going to take your job, Mike, but what I'm saying is a great job. Great job. I'm addicted to these people because they always helping me, right? But over the years, I've learned in my interactions why it's so important to have that lived experience, that community voice at the table. How best would you know if how the program works if you don't hear from people like me? I reflect what is possible given the right tools, given the shoestrings to tie. But you only know that when you get an opportunity to share that out with the people that matter. Next slide. And y'all have opportunity to keep this with you. Oh, then I got real big headed. Once I got my kids back and started going to college and stuff, I started working with the pediatricians. I was like, yeah, y'all help me, I'm gonna help y'all too. I like to say I used to start stomping with the big dogs. They were like, oh, Dr. Tamela Milan-Alexander. I was like, oh my God, did you call me doctor? What? Like, they just don't know I was 80 pounds dripping wet off heroin and cocaine a decade ago. You know how good that made me feel that I was referred to like that? Because they saw me differently. Because of the crowd I kept. Next slide. Just remember, it was my experience. You can't tell me nothing about this. This me. I show up as me everywhere I go. Everywhere I go. I don't need to be something else for anyone. I show up as Tamela Milan-Alexander because I love not having to shelter myself anymore from anyone. You can either live in your shame or you can let shame kill you. And I'm no longer ashamed of where I've been or where I come from. I'm no longer worried about how people look at me. What you see is what you get. My experiences have been vast, but they are mine. And nobody should treat you any type of way because of what you've been through. And that's the part of the system. That's the part about family we need to change. You on drugs, you struggling. Nobody should see you any differently than you a child of God, a human being who is deserving of every muster of empathy that you have. Next slide, please. This is Chicken, my first grandbaby. I'd like to talk about Chicken because it was her mother who I was dragged underneath the car with. And today, when she comes to my house and play, so, you know, I had got off the drugs, I had moved out the projects, and then about 5 years ago, after being on the Section 8 program for 21 years, I bought my first home, my very first home. Thank you. And, you know, it's amazing to think about all the things I would have missed out on if I died out there in them streets. If my baby would have been removed from me in that hospital and I wasn't given a chance. I think about everything I would have lost. And I revere everything I've gained. Like they play in my yard, they be like, Grandma Tammy. It's so precious to hear those words. I never thought that I would. Never thought it would be my normal. I thought I would never. I mean, I can vividly remember looking at the 14th floor of 141 North Walcott and remembering how hopeless I felt, how deep a need for a connection I needed to have, and how important it was that my case manager gave me that connection. And she's one of the reasons why I keep doing what I need to do. There's 1,000 chickens out there on the west and the south sides and downstate and rural communities. And what's crazy is that the inequities don't just stop at our borders. They are nationwide. So I choose to be a part of the solution. I had been a part of the problem. I had ran up and down the streets to the dope man, giving him all the money. Now I want to help build solutions, build opportunities so families that need your help can succeed. Let's start walking beside our folks. I don't need you to lead me. I want to walk beside you. Next slide. So I want to talk about flipping the switch. One of the things, that's it right there.
Sorry.
Yeah, go back. We gonna get to my proudest moments now, okay. Okay, but in the interest of time, we'll stay at flipping the switch. So one of the ways that I want to share with you guys today is how can you build that mechanism into the families that you're serving, whatever market, venue, any part of the social determinant of health timeline that you're on. Ways that you can flip the switch are inclusion and training. One of the things I do with the Family Partnership Network nationally is we go around, we talk about how do you include families? Families are advisors. They're not just patients, they're not just consumers, they're advisors. And we should be treated as such when we're asked about how can you do something better? You gotta have lived experience in there. And one way to do that is to be inclusive, to start at the beginning, not in the middle, not after all the brain, everybody smile. Everybody did their years. And I have a master's degree and I still show up as Tammy. It's Tamela is my government name. But Tammy still show up, right? And so I'm just gonna share with you, the first step to the inclusion of families is to stop excluding them from the process. Ask people to show up now. Ask them about the things they have to navigate now so that they can make a difference on how we move forward. Have more empathy. People, I used to think people would see me and I would say, I need Pampers, and they say, ooh, but your hair comb. Should I look like should I come in here stretched out on the, should I be? Why you got to be the poorest of the poor to get some help? You should look distraught to get some help. It's so unfair and so unrelenting for families who need support. And I want to be better at connecting folks. That's why I continue to stay in this field. This is my passion work. It's because somebody did it for me. I want to do it for others. And that's what we got to continue to hang on to. Be more empathetic, be more inclusive, and training. I could have came to LCFS Board of Directors like a deer caught my headlights. So what y'all talking about? But see, the thing is, I have been exposed. I've had many opportunities to sit at board meetings, and I show up as I should because it's important to be authentic. It's understandable sometimes to have to learn, but we have to train people to show up as themselves. And so I've always been good about that. I've always asked the right questions. I may not know all the questions to ask, but I guarantee I'm not leaving the room not knowing something. And that's what I try to do in everything I do. Next slide. So, what are my seeds to drop with you wonderful folks today? It's my Keep Families Together notes. Take time to peel back the onion and learn the needs of the participants in your programs. Think about their community and their support system. I lived in the projects. Where was I going to? Do you think it's a child care provider within the neighborhood? so I could go get that job. That wasn't happening. Did you think I could go get a 6-week checkup easily? And they shot every day on Walcott and Washington. Ask people about, how did you get here today? Stop looking at what someone is not doing and instead acknowledge what they are doing. I told you, they said I did not want my kids back. That was furthest from the truth. I want my kids back, but you got to make sure I got stable housing. I'm just not going to leave at my little housing project. This was a safe space. I know who the killers are. I know who doing the shooting. I'm good. I'm going to stay right here. If you give me stable housing, I go wherever you want me to go. And that's the difference. You can't just sell me a dream. We got to make sure some things are possible. Yes, I want my kids back, but I also don't want to go nowhere and not be able to take care of my kids. So it's important that I had that Section 8 voucher when I left out the projects. Allow yourself to become a true advocate. Sometimes people are hard to deal with. I think my LCFS worker probably changed careers after me. I just know I was something else. You just don't run into me every day. Don't put up boundaries and create barriers to connecting. Some of us are so, I've never seen this before, or I've never heard that before. I've never been through that before. Well, I have. But don't make that a barrier to communicating and connecting with people. It's so much more important to connect with people where they are, instead of trying to make people go on a pedestal that you enforce. Meet people where they at, they'll get there. Listen with your heart, not with your mind, through mercy and grace. And then before you leave here today, pledge today to work with your participants, not just for them, and take encounters out of your narrative. You got to see so many people this week. You got to do so many things. Just connect with one person. You can change a life. That one person that walked in that room changed my life. It didn't take much. It just took somebody cared enough to show up for me. Next slide. You know, one of the things I like to share about too is some people, and I've done a lot of podcasts and respectful care articles, but I want to lead with this because sometimes something as little as a pot of pan can make a difference. And I was sharing with this national group, right? Well, maybe you can't give money because of how your infrastructure is set up, right? You know, some people like, you got donations? Well, I know y'all ain't gonna give me no money. You think I'm gonna use it on drugs? That's okay. But when I was in the projects, I had one pot. I had one pot. I was so happy when somebody realized I needed some utensils. Can I get I ain't fried no chicken in so long. I need a frying pan. Can I get a couple of extra forks and spoons in there? Those would be helpful. But instead of asking for a seat, I had to start off by pulling up a folding chair. Now I got a sturdy chair. It don't fold no more. That's what success looks like to me today. Next slide. I told you once before, I wondered often how she would turn out. I was sexy then, y'all. I was, oof. Next slide. And while I have many titles, and I can walk through each and every one of them, the proudest title I have today is I am who I am. Next slide. That sixth child that introduced me to this program and this great work graduated from high school. Y'all can clap for that. my little house. Oh, I love it so much. I'm gardening and everything. My walls not concrete. And then I married my husband, who married me with 6 kids. That in itself is a feat, right? Proudest moments, proudest moments. Next slide. I'll wrap up by saying this. Every opportunity that I get to talk about the life that I have led, the opportunities that I have had, the children who keep calling me every day about how to boil water and how they bill so high, I don't know. But there are opportunities that would have never been there if it wasn't for the forces and the mercy and grace of God, who brought so many things together to make it possible for someone like me to be in front of all of you. So I leave you with this. Let's help ordinary people do extraordinary things. Thank you so much.
And Tamela will be back up for the question and answer session. Thank you. I don't know about you, but I've heard Tamela speak many times, and I'm always blown away. And I don't have too many skills, but one of them I have is to surround myself with people a lot smarter than me. So that leads into my introduction of our next session of 2 of my colleagues that are definitely smarter than me, that I learn from every day. So I asked Beverly Jones, our Vice President and COO, to come on up here. I'm going to do a quick little panel thing and then leave plenty of time for a Q&A, as well as Latasha Roberson-Gaffaro, who is our Vice President of or Associate Vice President of Everything. The title's like way too long. To talk a little bit about, as you know, we wanted Tamela, and really she talked a lot about her experience with us. It wasn't, which is I always love hearing, but really said, talk about what you're doing now. Talk about the community. Talk about what's there and how large agencies like LCFS, and I think I saw Kids Above All over there, and DCFS, and who am I missing? We need to start thinking outside of our world. But we also need to start pushing, got about a Center for Youth and Family Services, and those out on Zoom. But we also need to start looking at the systems we're in and start saying, let's all move, folks. We need to do things different. And we're part of pretty large systems. So I wanted to ask Beverly and Latasha both to come up and talk a little bit about how we're involved in our systems. I know other people here, some of the work they're doing as part of LCFS, and share that again, not to say, not for a pat on the back of LCFS, but to say, let's get about the work, people. Let's do better. Let's change things. Let's change those trajectories I showed way at the beginning, where the nation's going one way and we're going another. But again, as I shared, having people from all over the country, this is a dialogue happening in every state. So as I shared, Beverly is our Vice President and Chief Operating Officer, and I'm going to ask Beverly if she would. Beverly is the co-chair of the Governor's Racial Disproportionality and Child Welfare Task Force. So I'm going to ask Beverly if she will share a little bit about her work there and what's going on with that task force.
I'm really speechless and wish Tamela was still talking to us. I think a lot of lessons to be learned from just listening, right? So, so I am one of the co-chairs of the Governor's Task Force on Racial Disproportionality and Child Welfare, long title. And I want to point out my fellow co-chair, LaTanya, is with us, and our consultant, Vanessa, is also here, a part of the task force. So we saw a lot of data around asking the question, how well are we doing, right? I would suggest if we did the same data by race, the picture would be worse. The fact of the matter is that children, families of color get reported more, get indicated more, children removed more, stay in care longer than other children. And that's just, those are the facts. And the question is, what are we going to do about that? Or do we buy that picture? Do we accept that's just the reality? Or is it something we are doing or not doing that impacts those results? As a person of color, and having grown up with lots of family and family broadly defined, right? Institutions were not trusted. Education, maybe, only because that was the way, the path that people thought would change our future. But going to a doctor, and growing up, there was one African-American doctor, and that's where everybody went. And you would just sit for hours and hours. And I remember saying, when I grew up, I am not going to anywhere where I have to sit for hours and hours. But that was because that doctor was considered trustworthy and other doctors were not. I didn't have a teacher of color until I went to college. There's no, so race matters. And we need to eliminate the term color blindness. Because I'm proud of my color. So as I listened to Tamela speak to us, I was thinking about our task force and some of our principles. And the first one is to create conditions where child welfare involvement is rare. And families can access what they need and to be supported and equipped. Let's just stop there. There are others that are more importantly, but reading that, it really struck me that we also need to figure out what to do about that. So the task force meets every month. Our first meeting was in September. It's open to the public so people can participate and see what goes on. We've divided into subcommittees, and I know we have a growing list of recommendations. And one of them will be about helping and support families way before they need to think about getting connected with the formal child welfare system. And we have to, and this is Beverly, I'm not speaking for the task force. All of us need help. All of us. There is no such thing as I don't need any help. All of us do. And that help can mean many different things and comes in all sizes, colors, right? I mean, but the notion that there's those of us who never need help and those who do. We all do. And somehow we need to embrace that and then ask ourselves, how does that look like, feel like for others? But I'm really proud of the work the task force has accomplished thus far. It didn't take long for everybody to say, everybody needs help. Let's create the system where help is easy to get, and it's for all of that we need to address our race biases that we have, the inequities we have, and it's doable. It's doable. And every one of us in this room and out there have a role to play in impacting. that. So, you certainly are welcome to join. It's the second or third Wednesday. I'm looking at second or third. Third? It's the third Wednesday. We meet from 9 to 12. And it's all virtual. It's by Zoom. Join and listen and join the conversation. This is not a one person, and child welfare does not mean the Department of Family and Children's Services. It means all children and their welfare. And it's so easy to point fingers at others rather than looking at ourselves in our own agencies and institutions and asking the hard questions. So.
Beverly. We also have Latasha Roberson-Gaffaro. Am I saying that correctly?
You said it beautifully.
I'm trying to get my.
I love it.
It was terrible.
Tasha, you sit on a slew of committees. Is there a couple you want to highlight and the work that you're doing on behalf of the families in Illinois and as your LCFS role or in your private role? Because I know you're involved in many things.
Sure. Thanks, Mike. So I would say one of the things that LCFS has really recognized is that we can't do any of this work alone. And like Tamela told us, is that there were a slew of people, a slew of communities in which she partnered with to make her journey just that more light. She already got a whole lot of light, right? But to do that. So one of the things that we have really tried to do is be a leader within the community and partner with folks that are smarter than us, who have either succeeded with us or they failed, and we get to learn from them. And so we have been participants in several different stakeholder groups. One, for us to be able to kind of bring about collective power, but also to make sure that there's something sustainable beyond LCFS. So LCFS celebrates our 150th year this year. And so since 1873, we've been, partnering with folks, but it's been with us partnering with communities. And so I won't share the slew of stakeholder groups that we're part of, but I'll share a couple of them. One stakeholder group that we are involved with, and Beverly's also involved in this one, is the Child Welfare Advisory Committee. And so this is a committee that is established. It's established based on an executive order, and it is an advisory body to the director of the Department of Children and Family Services. And I'm going to mention this one, and I'm also say the challenges that most people think about the child welfare system as the Department of Children and Family Services, and that's part of the problem. And so one of the things that we try to do, so I'm going to say about the Child Welfare Advisory Committee, but then I also say the problem is that we need more community providers believing that this is all of our problems and issues. So the Child Welfare Advisory Committee, it consists of community-based providers and also from the public and the private sector. The goal really is to identify the emerging policies and practices and things that are impacting children and families and the systems in the workforce. And so from the Child Welfare Advisory Committee, which Beverly actually leads, along with another private co-chair, there's several other subcommittees that I'm part of. And I want to bring part of these just to talk about the different ways in which we are partnering. So some is around workforce and professional development. Tamela just talked about somebody who came into her door who was already ready to work with and not for, and not I need you to do this. And so one is the workforce and professional development. And so in this particular one, we're trying to make sure that it's trauma-informed, strength-based, but it's really centered on making sure that our workforce is well-resourced, competent, and that we are not competing for those same kind of resources. And so we're thinking about things that impact our workforce so that they can approach the issues that families are having. We also there's a couple other ones from the Child Welfare Advisory Committee, which is short for it stands for CWAC. And so there's also the Race Equity Committee, transformation teams and action teams. And what those parts are, I see some people who have been on those for a long period of time. And so that's really about listening and building power with voices that are often unheard. And kind of thinking about our practices of engagement and increasing representation and kind of disaggregating data in a way that we can make solutions that really do focus in on centering issues and kind of and bringing about some change. There's also the LGBTQI, DEI, so Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee. And so I say all those things around race-informed and justice-informed practices, not to say LCFS is involved in all those stakeholder groups, but to say in order for us to look at our data, which Beverly will probably share a little bit later, we need to know what other community providers are doing. We need to know what the schools are seeing. We need to know what the court systems are seeing. We need to know what families are seeing. We're also trying to be part of these committees where there are people with lived experience are on there. So they're sharing their stories because they're the experts of their own lives, and then figuring out how do we then take that and transform LCFS's services, and then also if whatever we've done really well, because we've done some things really well, we've also done some things not so well. And so whatever we've done, right, being able to share and kind of like how people learn from them. So I'm not going to share any more of those, Mike, unless we end up having time, and I can certainly, I can talk.
Well, I know. I want to make sure we save plenty of time for Q&A, so is there anything either of you want to make sure that you also highlight before we have Tamela come up back up here and
No, I would
answer
just building on what Tasha said is that each of us in our own organization can do something. Doing nothing just perpetuates where we are now, and nothing really changes. So, LCFS decided to look at, because as Mike said, foster care is our largest program, to look at race equity about children in care. And the story was not pretty, but it was factual. So we could just all sit around and cry and moan about, oh, this is terrible, or we can act, and we chose to act. It's way after the fact, children separated from their families and for years, but being able to return children back to family and they stay with family is well worth the journey. We need to start a lot sooner and faster in the beginning. All of it around, and think about all families need support. What can that look like? And really stretch ourselves. Be committed to that goal. And be committed to that goal. So I'm proud of the work we invested. Our sister agency, Lutheran Social Services of Illinois, has joined us. We now have the opportunity through, and Mike is on the board of the Illinois Collaboration on Youth, ICOY as we call it. And I think there are about 12 agencies who are going to come together to look at this issue and say, let's do better, we will do better.
The only other thing that I would add is that if you're thinking about ways in which you can get involved, there's a whole lot of duplicate efforts that are happening. So there's so many different things where you can get involved. So there is the advisory commission on, I gotta read it though, because it's a long list.
Right. It's a long
Advisory
title.
Commission on Reducing the Disproportionate Representation of African American Children in Foster Care. Yes, so it does a lot of similar things as what the task force does, and I just wanted to be able to plug that one as well, because one of the things that this group is doing is really looking at every point in time when a child comes into foster care, and before that, what are the reasons why people are needing stuff like extended family support or preventative services, or accessing things like 211, which is a community-based services. Why are people needing these services in the first place? So that it can prevent them from having to go into foster care at all. And so one of the things we're looking at is external resources and where. So Tamela talked about like, hey, where was the nearest place where I could go get a well child check? Where was the nearest place where I could go and get childcare? And so what we're doing is mapping all of the resources that are in the state of Illinois, and then being able to say from all those points in time, where are we at? So that's also part of the Open Meetings Act.
So like I said, we want to leave plenty of time for Q&A, so Tamela, if I'm guessing most of the questions will be for our dynamic speaker, Tammy. And folks online, if you put anything in the Q&A or anybody present, now's the time to quit listening and ask some questions and so on.
I will just say this while we're waiting for questions. it was interesting to me, and this happened in our task force. And these are people with lived experience. Talk about they don't trust the data we show them. They don't believe it. And we didn't have time to really talk in depth about what that means, but that has really resonated with me in trying to figure out why and what do we want to do about that. So.
Mike, I've got a first question here from the Q&A online, and this one's for you, actually. Do the trends take into consideration the increase in kinship family placement? So when you were looking at your data for the trends, do they take into consideration kinship and family placement?
They did, and actually that was if you notice, one of the pieces I really highlighted was New York City, and that was, I didn't put that up on a slide, but that was another strategy they used was kinship and then moving to a guardianship relationship. But they also, how they brought their numbers significantly down was recognizing the value of kin and utilizing those as the family for as resources for the children. Imagine something as crazy as that. So yes, that children in care does represent children also in a kinship relationship that's still a state or county based on the system has legal guardianship of. Similar to Illinois, Illinois' numbers represents about the half of the children in our system are in kinship care, even though they're still considered formally foster children. So it does, but that in particular in New York City, they weren't using kin much. They had a big focus on kinship relationships and finding kin and utilizing those family as a resource for the children they were caring for. So.
All right, I got another one if nobody else does. I'm gonna fill in this a little bit longer. I think that we have a little bit of a comment here. It says, I think until we all have well-trained workforce to work with children and families, we will always have an inadequate system. This person's with CASA, and there's wait lists are months long. And I guess, let's see, that they were a catalyst for a lawsuit for children's mental health and chaired a workforce committee, but that we need to step up partnerships for training. So can any of you want to speak to what kind of training do you think is necessary to really have a workforce that's trained to do what Tamela said her person came in and did, to really step up and say, I'm gonna engage with you and not speak at you?
All right, here, this is going on. Help comes in all shapes and sizes and not necessarily our workforce or people who work for us. Sometimes it's the neighbor next door, a teacher, it could be anything. And I think until we begin to stretch, this is not just about our child welfare specialists. The burden is not solely on them. I think how we think about the work and what's needed, and that doesn't mean I think we need to have a poor workforce at all, but it's not the beginning, the end of it all. It requires a lot more people who probably know families a lot better than we do to support and believe in families.
Yeah, so Tamela, I'd love to hear what you have to say too. One of the things I think is really around being able to check our biases, right? Mm-hmm. And so there's those implicit bias trainings and those kind of things, but that's that can be part of a solution, but I don't think it's the whole solution. It's really about the people thinking about your experiences, but also being able to not have this paternalistic, like you must be this in order to get your children back. You must not be this in order to get help, or somebody has to look tattered. I think that's what you said. Like what you said, gotta look distraught. Somebody doesn't have to be. Anybody could need some help, and so maybe if we have some implicit bias training, or just being able to check our biases around what does who is the person who needs help and who's the people who are given help. I always ask people, what's the difference between you and the person that you're serving when they come into the field? And I feel like the more you have alphabet soup behind your name, the more you can separate how you are different from your clients. And I think some of it is around us just being able to do those things. I don't know if you have anything that you want to add.
No, I would say this, and I think this is really important, is that what I've learned through my experiences, just showing up at different like focus groups. I think it started off mostly about focus group because somebody always wants to hear in your community what you have to say. But it's usually to get your information and you never get any feedback from it. And when you were talking, Beverly, about data, I would be in rooms and we would say, well, who did they interview? Because that don't happen around here. So you can't trust it because they couldn't have talked to them. They must have talked to somebody on the edge of the community. They was over there on the gentrified side. They wasn't on this side with us. So this is the matter, right? Because we hanging out outside. We on the block. We like, I ain't seen nobody come ask us no questions. So somebody is not being truthful. And so that's a big part of it too. But then for me, when I talk to and recruit folks to do the work that I've done over the years, I always talk about what happened to me. A very short 60-second speech, but people need to see we need to look at what's possible. You talked about, Beverly, you didn't see your first African-American teacher till you got to college. If I'm in the community, I say, by the way, I got a master's degree, they be like, get out of here. We remember you was out there in the line and you was like, no, it's a better way to do this. Split the line in half. Y'all go on this side, go on this side, be more effective in the distribution of the narcotics today. Those are the type of things I've never been a dumb girl. Made dumb choices. But the thing about it is, and I make jest of a lot of stuff, I have to laugh at my life because at some point you just be wallowing in tears. But I uplift those experiences because they give me what I am today. I'm not here today. If it weren't for those experiences and sitting in those rooms and listening to people and people start throwing out all those acronyms, I'd be like, I have no idea what you're talking about. And the people would grab their chest. We didn't know you didn't understand what we were talking about. No, I'm not a doctor. I'm sitting here because you asked me to use my voice. I can't give you a good decision. I can't give you credible feedback if you don't come to my level. Instead of making it a teachable moment, you should know these terms. You've been around here to bring you up here. You need to come up here where we at.
Right.
Instead of the expectation being to meet me where I was at. And so that's really critical moving forward. In everything I do now, I'm not trying to. This is not a teachable moment. This is just a moment. And we really have to start treating people like they. You don't have to be a doctor to get information. The stuff I was doing, I had a high school diploma with for a very long time. Am I appreciative of my educational opportunities? Yes. But I didn't need them to do what I was doing. And so we keep putting the emphasis on people being educated in this instead of putting the emphasis on people's experiences and how deep and how well people have been able to navigate these systems for decades. And people still somewhere trying to figure out how A ended up being B. Why the trend going this way and not that way? And nobody's invited families in. Go figure. And we've not trained them to show up and show out. When we think about training, show people how to show up.
I have a question. So I'm wondering what, I need a mic. I don't think I, oh, okay. Wow. I'm wondering what you guys think about or offer suggestions for bringing, like you said, meeting people where they are. I think I'm a director of foster care and have been for a while, been working in this business with Mike for a very long time, but I wonder if, changing mics, I wonder if you have any suggestions as we begin to talk about funding cycles and budgets and things of that nature of how we can fund or be able to equip our programs and agencies and communities with resources. For example, I have a real big issue with us trying to reunify kids, right, with their parents, and we want to see them in natural surroundings. And I understand that we gotta have visits being supervised, and I understand all that. But what about having opportunities for parents and families to go someplace? So whenever I get funding for a grant or something, I'm like, we're going to Navy Pier. And it's something as simple as getting on a bus, a yellow school bus, and driving down Lakeshore Drive with 50 kids and parents, and some of us meeting there to go on a Ferris wheel ride that was all of 10 minutes, and then going to McDonald's to change their trajectory in visitation. But we don't have an opportunity to do much of that in our programs in our communities, because the reality is that people lack resources. And if we're talking about bringing people together where they are in communities, I had opportunities to go downtown because my mama got on the State Street bus and took us. But everybody doesn't have that opportunity. And what opportunities are we creating for those people to know there are resources and there are opportunities that the kids can go and the families can go, we can make them healthy and exposed and all that kind of stuff. So that's a long answer, long comment, but just what do you think about that, given the state that we're now in? This is February, budget starts being talked about in March, and grants and proposals are being written. That is one of the things that I would like to see more of.
Can I just jump in and share with you? One of the first things that happened when I was able to get Feeney, her name is Feeney Monster, who stayed with me, I was able to go home with. And when I joined the Healthy Start program, because of my interaction with my pediatrician and got involved in, the programming, one thing they always did was family engagement day. Man, I've been getting high for a number of years. My kids haven't been anywhere with me. But we got a chance to go to the dolphin show in the zoo on these engagement days. And they meant everything to my kids. It's like they started looking up to me like, I didn't take you to the zoo, but I had something to do with you getting to the zoo. Or if we went to the children's museum and I was able to interact with them. I didn't take you to the museum, but I had something to do with us going to the museum. It was the influence, right? But it was these opportunities. And one of the things when I started working for the program that I instituted back then, and I miss it now. But when I was a Healthy Start, we always made sure we had a family engagement day with the families that we served. And it always brought out the best, asked family members to come join. And also, when it was time to get my kids back, they could talk about the experience because they have observed me in public with my children.
Exactly.
What I also just heard you say is that it doesn't have to be this grand thing that's spending a whole lot of money, right? Is that you can do those activities and you can share activities that are available in the community that everybody can access to. One of the things that your question also stirred in me that I think we don't do well in Illinois is versus us for community-based providers competing for resources versus coming in on grants together. Coming in on things. Imagine what we could do if we actually said, you got some talents, and we got some talents. We pull together. I think people who are funding opportunities like that want to see community providers come together, and I think we could go so much further. And sometimes you just have to start. I think about for our organization when we were trying to put together some race-informed practices and trainings and those kind of things, is we just had to say we were going to jump in the leap of faith to say that we were going to find the resources for that. But I think agencies pulling together their resources and going after something together, you could do a lot more. Did you have something you wanted to add?
No, I think sometimes we make things more difficult than they are. And I know we did this regularly for what we called our Regenerations program, duly involved youth. Every month they did something, and it wasn't elaborate. They just took some, and they just enjoyed it. They had never been before. So I think it's the responsibility in us imagining doing things need to come first, and then do it. Just do it, and doing it together. We could do more things collaboratively than alone about that. And it doesn't take much to put a smile on a even adults' faces.
We was all laughing.
Right.
You know,
I'm gonna tell you, one of the things that we did, and I'm getting them look from Mike like, okay, we need to move, but
There's one other question they
I
want to
got
get to.
like 3 more here.
Okay. Well, one of the things I would suggest is that we actually went and asked some people want to help.
Right.
We used to had a new director start with our organization in August. Within the first 30 days, we had gotten free, now I'm gonna mess it, this is not the name of that team. I think it's Skybox Tickets, that's not what that's called. I don't think that that's the name of a team called Skybox. But anyway, we ended up asking,
Sounds good.
it sounds,
Sky?
I don't know. Anyway, but we got a chance to take them to this game, and it was literally, we said, hey, we are a foster care agency, and we want to be able to allow our children and families to have this experience. And they donated a whole bunch to us within that first month. And so sometimes it's asking the question because people really do want to help too.
You got to cut you because we have one last question because we're getting.
Okay, well, I'll go with this one then. So somebody here talks about that there used to be LAN, local area network communities that provided preventative services to families in the communities. For like wraparound services. And so they have the money come for rent, but the family receive wraparound services such as to address school issues or mental health. Is this the type of thing that you're looking for the future? To go back to kind of the LAN, local area network system?
For me, that's not necessarily. I mean, that's one way to do it. I don't know that's the one and only way to do it. And it depends on the community. I mean, they may have their own idea about what that would look like as opposed to us thinking, oh, let's go do X, Y, and Z.
As well as, and I'm gonna, even though I'm not a panelist, I'm gonna jump in on that one. Think of the YMCA. It's not a formal system, it's just something that exists in a community that people go to for certain things. One takeaway I learned from out of this from Tamela is we've come up with this new term, people with lived experience. Well, we don't call them clients anymore. Versus now it's Tammy. It's so the more we can put it into the community with the people and support that, I don't care what we call it. And as long as we don't put all the money into running the system versus helping the folks. I do think we're at time, but I apologize for the folks online that we didn't get to your question, but we want to be respectful of people's time. So thank you so much to our panel. Thank you, Tamela, Tammy. Thank you in particular for Tamela. For sharing both her journey, but how she is active in the community now, the state's a community also. So why are we doing this and what do we always end these with a call to action. Lutheran Child and Family Services. If anybody doesn't know anything about Lutheran, it was founded by Martin Luther, a German, and we stubborn. So we are going to be continuing this fight and this push. Our ask of you is to please do the same in your communities. In everybody in here, whether you work within our system or not, you're part of a church community, you're part of a neighborhood, you're part of a town, you're part of a state, you're part of a nation that isn't doing well. And what we want to see is also learn from Tamela, a family well-being system. Remember my analogy to the healthcare system, where we're now looking at, well, maybe we need to make sure there's a good grocery store so people can get healthy food and not have a heart attack. So that's monumental that a grocery store is considered part of healthcare now. So same thing for family well-being. What is it that every community needs for families to thrive? Because then we will have future families that are thriving versus what we see now. So I have a couple little quick business aspects. We'll be sending out a post-event e-blast to all attendees with resources discussed during the event, as well as the recording of today's presentation. Hey, you get to see us again. I encourage you to share this email with other members of your organizations or network of people, because it takes all of us. As I said, we're stubborn and we're going to keep pushing but we can't do this by ourselves. And we truly believe this is what families need. It's a system that supports them. If you signed up to receive CEUs, which are continuing education units for any folks that aren't social workers, or a certificate of participation, you'll be receiving a brief email survey that you'll need to complete before getting credit for today's event. Thank you again for joining us and for your commitment to children and families. We started this presentation a little after 12:30 with happy birthday to LCFS. So for those of us that are here in person, we have some cake out there, right? This is the start, 2023. This is our first celebration of our anniversary, so you gotta have cake if you're celebrating. So it'd be great if you can stay for a little bit and learn more about each other and have a piece of cake. As well as we'll have some other refreshments out there. So thanks to all, thank you to all of those out there online. And forget about the business of doing this, we can do this. So let's create a family well-being system in our state and our country. Thank you, God bless.